thanks for stopping by Brian for Liberty today. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to check me out. If you give me a second and subscribe to the channel, that would be a huge help trying to grow here, and every subscription helps. If you really like the content, please take a second to share it as well. Turn on the notifications. We're going to keep trying to get videos out faster and faster for you, so you don't want to miss when something new is coming. So kind of a few different things we're going to go over today. We're going to talk about Tucker Carlson, totalitarianism, how Americans aren't shocked by this anymore. This is a video that he put out after an interview with a corporate leader, just kind of talking about Chinese, their response, the China response to coronavirus, what they did to quell the spread there. We're going to talk a little bit about the protesters, the armed protesters storming state capitals has been kind of a big story here for the last several days. We're going to get a take on that. We're going to talk to or check in with Sam Cedar, as he's always an interesting character. His take on these things is always interesting. So took a look at what the majority report had to say about that, and I had a response to that as well. We're going to take a look at a couple other things here in regards to police being called, civil liberties being certainly threatened in our response to this, and kind of what the take is on that and how we should be proceeding as Americans and what we should be looking for long-term from a structural perspective. So, but I want to start by saying today we are seeing a lot of states returning to normal, starting to return to normal, easing restrictions, opening things up. A lot of states are allowing for retailers and restaurants to reopen, dining rooms, as long as, with different types of restrictions in place as far as how many tables and limiting of seating capacity and those kinds of things, but at least the beginning of a return to normal. And I think it's very important that we all keep in mind that this is going to coincide with a spike in cases. That's what's going to happen. You're going to see an increase, and the media is going to start pounding on that because fear sells, and this is the lead story. So we have to keep in mind that the reason we're going to see a spike in cases is because this is a virus. You can't just sit in your house and expect it to go away. When we started returning to normal, there was no question that we're going to see this spread. We have to remember, we have to keep our eye on what the purpose of all of this was in the first place. And it was not to make the virus disappear. It wasn't to make it go away. We all know that you can't sit in your house and hide and expect the virus to never come back. It's going to spread again. The purpose of this was to slow the spread so that it maintains, or so that it stays below a certain level, so that our healthcare system is capable of dealing with it. That was the purpose of all of this. So when we start returning back to normal, we can expect to see an increase. Hopefully we have given ourselves enough time to protect the elderly, to protect the people at risk. We have a strong enough understanding of how we need to behave responsibly in order to protect those people and to keep the spread slow enough so that it's manageable by our healthcare professionals. But there is going to be an increase, and we have to remember that, and that's expected. And no matter how long we wait, the virus is going to return as we start engaging in commerce and engaging with each other once again. So just keep that in mind. You're going to see the reports coming out about the spikes, and please continue to be responsible, continue to social distance, hand sanitizer, just follow those good hygiene tips that they keep putting out there, because that's how we keep this spread slow and hopefully prevent another slowdown in the fall, or another shutdown, I should say, in the fall as this flu season picks back up. So we're going to get going here with one of the clips. Tucker Carlson interviewing a gentleman who thankfully isn't in the government yet, but is definitely he's a higher up at a corporation, and he's really just kind of giving his opinion on the Chinese reaction to coronavirus. So take a look at the clip and what this gentleman has to say.
That's the quarantine that you think they deserve high praise for. Why?
Well, I think, Tucker, if you just look at the results, okay, so I know there's always going to be questions about exactly what the numbers are, but I think the harsh action that they took, given the scale of China and the number of big cities in it, was exactly what they needed to do to be able to prevent the outbreak from going any further.
And if you listen to this carefully, going into this, Tucker Carlson was telling him about the things that the Chinese did, locking people in their apartments, jailing people, people literally being left to starve to death in order to prevent the spread of this virus, the incredible draconian totalitarian steps that the Chinese government took. And this gentleman really kind of praised the Chinese reaction to this. And that's terrifying in and of itself, that a businessman for the United States would be able to praise the communist government for the extreme steps that they took to quash coronavirus, and that he would have such a cavalier attitude towards totalitarianism. That's scary enough. But Tucker Carlson makes a really good point here about how totalitarianism doesn't scare Americans anymore, that we're not shocked by totalitarianism in this country anymore. And the fact that this story, his statements, his praise for communist China and their response to this, the fact that this didn't get picked up nationwide by other news outlets kind of tells us that that's true. There is a sense of, hey, whatever it takes and justifies the means out there that should be very, very scary to Americans. Totalitarianism is incredibly dangerous. It's definitely more dangerous than this virus is. And we are really letting our guard down against this. And I feel like there's a push to compare everybody who talks about civil liberties and talks about totalitarianism as far-right extremists. This is important to everybody. This is something that matters across the board. Freedom of speech is important to the left and the right. You know, we can argue over the Second Amendment, but I don't think anybody on the left or the right is going to argue against the freedom to practice your religion, the freedom of a free press, the freedom to peacefully gather. The First Amendment is incredibly important to everybody in this country. I would say almost equally. And so the idea that there's somebody out there who is okay with setting these liberties aside and can praise a communist government for the things that they did, and that it didn't draw a powerful reaction, to me, that's scary. I mean, we talk about science fiction and certain things that'll never happen here and the authoritarianism that'll never appear, but take a look at this clip.
Please move away from each other and separate.
Elizabeth, New Jersey is now using drones to spread the life-saving message.
You are not immune to this virus.
That's got to be worrisome, right? I mean, we've got to be a little concerned about that. Are these drones going to stay in action after this is all over? I always think back to 9/11. When we talk about the march towards totalitarianism, it's always a long, slow process. It doesn't happen overnight. Okay, Germany didn't turn into Nazi Germany until it was Nazi Germany. Yet, you know, these things take time to evolve. I always think back to 9/11. To me, as the start of Americans really just feeling comfortable allowing government to set aside liberty so that we would feel a little bit more safe. I mean, you look at the establishment of the TSA, the Department of Homeland Security. You look at the passing of the Patriot Act and all the different things that entails. It was pretty obvious, and we don't talk about it anymore. It was very controversial when we did it, and the ACLU was all over it, and there's all this controversy over giving the government all this authority and setting aside liberties, and we don't really talk about it that much anymore. It just keeps getting renewed. It's now this massive monitoring, the warrantless wiretapping, all of these things are just, now that they've been in place for so long, we've all just accepted that as reality, and that's perfectly fine. And we don't argue with that stuff anymore. So my question is what's going to be left over after this? What permanent structural things are going to change because of the thing that we did? Right? I talked about this at the very beginning of this outbreak. I was in support of the shutdown orders, and I've come back and I've said that was a mistake on my part. And you know, I've said that in multiple videos. You can go back and look, but I did support it. And initially, I felt like we needed to get a handle on this, determine what was going on, and then we could start easing restrictions. So, but like I said, I've gone back and I've said I think that was a mistake on my part. But at that time, I also said what we really should be focusing on is what kind of long-term structural changes are we going to see in our day-to-day lives as Americans after this? That's the more important part than a governor's short-term order. That governor, you know, there are things in place. So the legislatures are taking action to push back against gubernatorial authority. So there's structures in place for that. But what are we going to leave in place long-term that's going to further erode our freedom and liberty after this? And then what's the next thing? And how far down the road do we go before we say that's enough? So that's very concerning to me. And then this video these are the protesters here at the state capitol, and Sam Cedar has a reaction to that.
Now you can't quite see there the guys with guns. This is not, I want to make it clear. This is not, yeah, there we go. This is not guys protesting about, Second Amendment rights or a bill about carrying their weapons. They're there ostensibly protesting something completely different. But they're bringing weapons. Like, what are they trying to communicate with their flak jackets and their semi-automatic rifles? They're trying to communicate the potential of violence. What that is terrorism.
And then here's another video, and the two videos kind of jumped out at me in terms of his reaction to civilians carrying firearms out of the state capitol, which I think is a valid point. Why are you mixing what is ostensibly a Second Amendment? What is it you're doing there? But I want you to take a look at this video first.
Are you aware that we're in a stay-at-home order right now?
Yeah, obviously.
By the government?
Yes,
of
I am
Wisconsin?
aware.
Okay, you're aware of that?
I am aware.
So I don't need to explain that to you?
Why are you here?
Because your daughter is going to play at other people's home and you're allowing it to happen. Stop having your kid go by other people's home.
Are we done here?
No, we're not.
Okay.
Your middle initial and your last name.
I'm not giving it to you. I haven't done anything wrong.
Okay. Perfect. We got it.
His primary point, Mr. Cedar's primary point in this was that the carrying of weapons and flak jackets and wearing flak jackets is a threat of violent action, and therefore it's terrorism. I don't agree with that. Maybe it's the threat of violence is there. I agree with that, and I don't think these protesters should have been carrying rifles and wearing flak jackets at the state capitol in terms of their protest for a couple of reasons. First, it was wholly unnecessary, and second, you're trying to spread a message and you want to build as broad of a coalition to get that across as possible. Carrying these weapons didn't help you in any way in terms of bringing more people in. There are people who on the left who may not agree with many of your other principles who are going to agree with you in this protest. If you had gone down there and you had social distanced and worn masks, even though the science on wearing masks is a little fuzzy, but if you had social distance, worn masks, leave the guns and the flak jackets at home and conducted a peaceful, sensible protest, you would have probably seen a much higher level of support for your cause. You've really hurt your cause by engaging in this protest the way that you did. But to Sam Cedar's point regarding the threat of violence due to the weapons and the flak jackets, let me ask you this. Are those police then a threat to this woman? They're wearing flak jackets. They're armed. And this is a mother who just let her child go play. That is what the response is. That's what they're responding to. This is the fundamental issue that I have with the left, the far left, the progressive left in this country, is they are not opposed. He had an issue with civilians carrying those weapons. He had no issue with government agents coming to a woman's house. If the implication of flak jackets and firearms is a threat of violence, then that applies in both scenarios. Those police are threatening violence against this woman. And he has no problem with that because he is on board, as many people in this country are, with government having a monopoly on force. This is the Second Amendment argument, and I don't want to drag us off into the weeds there, but this statement by him, to me, the contrast of the civilians and the police, what was the purpose of sending armed government agents? Did we send armed people to this woman's house because she let her child go play? Is that a reasonable response? Does that, at the very least, if you're going to say these civilians carrying flak jackets and firearms is a threat of violence, that these police wearing flak jackets, you could see that that's under their shirts, but you could see that the bulletproof vest is under there, and their weapons is also a threat of violence. This is a threat of violence against a mother who let her child go play. We should be just as upset about that, should we not? If we're going to be upset about these people carrying firearms in the state capitol. And that's an important distinction. This is all of this stuff, all of these draconian measures we've taken, setting aside liberties, all these different things that we've done are all moving us down the road to a more totalitarian existence, the same way that 9/11 did. And we have to start looking at these things and deciding whether or not that's okay. When they broke up that baby shower, I don't know if you guys saw the headlines that police broke up a baby shower. Were they armed? Were they wearing flak jackets? Were they threatening violence at a baby shower? there's been plenty of when the mother was arrested in the park for letting her kid play on the equipment. Was that a threat of violence? Is it okay for the state to constantly be threatening us with violence? So those are that's the point. And I think he's right about the civilians not carrying their weapons there, but then we have to say, hey, this is an overreaction to a mother letting her kid go play too. We have to call that out on both sides. So no matter where you stand on the health issue, on the health side of this, we have to hold both sides of this accountable and say that, hey, if you're we have to have proper and proportional responses in terms of what we are answering. What's the call we're answering here? Oh, this mom let her kid go play. Do we need to send 2 armed officers to her house? Probably not. So that's where I took that, and I just really jumped out at me that the monopoly of force of the state is so okay with the progressive left, and I think that's very terrifying because you have a large portion of the country that, as we march towards totalitarianism, are going to allow further encroachments on our liberties, and don't have a problem with the government really flexing its muscle, even when it's not necessarily appropriate for it to be doing so. So I just wanted to hit those clips real quick. Everybody, I'm excited about us getting open back up, getting back to work, getting the economy opened up. Be prepared for the spread. Be responsible. Be safe. Social distance. Follow the guidelines of the hand sanitizer, washing your hands, all those things, so that we can keep the spread slow enough that we don't have to force ourselves back into this situation in the fall. And hopefully, I'll see you all out there. And if not, please hit the subscribe button, turn on the notifications, and we'll see you here next time. Thank you all for stopping by.